Hello, America. And then further, how we are named by the species body. And then further, by how, you know, beyond how, as the species body system, now multiple ones, all tactical ulterior from its own, and all unity, all forms of unity, suits and ties, counters to it, exceptions in exception nature, used tactical ulterior from how nature uses itself. This is how identity is nature, but it is also the additional ways. Nobody could be the identity of the hyper simultaneous, but we are all to an extent. And wherever an extent of itself is, also an increasingly as value as nature, where how that is, and the opposite sequence nature, this is true conversely too. Simultaneously, where and how more and more forever nature is being made per science. This requires a quality of fact treatment nature. As a hypertheater, as the hypertheater, the one that employed another species bodies to have male, female, individual, group difference slash S, species body difference, black pupils, whites of eyes, exceptions in exception nature, different color eyes. Go look at the other species body eyes, exception nature. And this about difference. We have the same eyes, they're not different, and they're different. Because one identity is distinctly, non distinctly, and hyper simultaneously in demonstration to ourselves as that which is hyper native pure. And so we should sense where and how it employed what is actually discernible for science is where and how a breaching method before modern countries were made, A through Z. They had already the names of the human species body, their groupings, had been employed to fact nature defenses of themselves that were being used remotely by what needed to counter that, by what was forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded them to defend human fact nature quality aspects in nature as formal defenses of that, with opinions and convictions, and with exploitations of time and positions at formal locations. At formal locations, there are qualities of fact nature. In other words, it's too late. Before the evidence is that the interstates with President Trump, and they have a sick possession over the other presidents too, because they already used the same agencies already used their identities, their fact nature, their uses of their identity's value, indifference, with reason, and with reason's premises, reason's fact nature, quality aspects of nature. Part of the reason I'm referring to our nature as nature instead of identity is because it comes with that part of identity that is semi-nature relationship. It is not its complete identity. Its complete identity's relationship to itself, and the value of that, again, as a singular system, correlation by that, which is correlation by the hyper invisible but still discernible, as a distinct identity of invisible that comes with the actual proper scientific discernment of each science. Identity reliant upon the other sciences. Identity in ways tactical ulterior, too, again, from all systems individually grouped together in defenses of that. See, this hyper projection. I mean, there's another hyper projection, too, singular, that is a breaching method. But it is a method that has roles with it self-value. And that was used remotely because simultaneously, while it is self-valued, even the people that don't want it, including the government of every modern country, it makes it and keeps exceptions for that because it employed all differences. With readings of statutes, finite details were left out and increasingly are made up. Increasingly, this is valued roles with it out of their locations, where and how the breaching method sustained, not just tied to one thing. It caused negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures and sustained that to exploit forced roles. And also, so everyone where took manifest projection / hyper projection roles. So roles with the breaching method no one wanted, but now you're doing what it says. So there's exceptions because it's going to be in your factory manager. Everyone was employed to hurt other people for the breaching method, and or to help other people for the breaching method, where that needed criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments and or criminal insidiousness natures of negative treatments, simultaneously multi-front, per that identity theft, fraud, slander against our founders overtly, / insidiously, simultaneously, and against everyone else sickly distinctly. Still, because we left out how sickly non-distinctly. So, again, I'm not a doctor. I don't know why you call me Frank. Ron Adams brought up a former director of that FBI, Robert Luskin, and other people who have been commenting on my posts, who I recorded, hyper recorded, involved with child offenders, leaders of kids, also who have been roles since before the World Trade Center attack. With, for example, today on Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN, they have only they're a certain type of victim / hyper victim. Same way the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and interbranch, retired and standing, have been in state. And when I say interbranch, the three branches of government, it's also with exception nature. And the difference between that and the insidiousness of the logic of people A through Z, where and how assigned to other, was that which identities, values / value progression, a correlation that it was capable of discerning. So, who was evil? Ron Adams. Ron Adams says he despises the founding fathers. They were evil. See, he came through criminally foreign influence campuses. There were also sickly, distinctly criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought. Our founders told us to get the Constitution unabridged to explain how and why they lied about our founders. Our founders had to hide their roles, countering the slavery method, entrenched individually, sickly, distinctly north and south with slavery before they were born, with the design of the suburbs. So they have employed people like Ron Adams to pretend passions and emotions, leaving out and making up finite details while making up and leaving out actually what is simultaneously recorded. And again, it comes with the hyper simultaneous. The intelligence community is recorded using the narratives by the shown because they're being used for their own motivations. Former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, has roles with Ed Powell, as Ron Adams said. That's another name that they keep stacking. Wethersfield police, people associated with them. They have wire crime acts and methods and roles with child abusers, offenders, and roles with other police departments and forms with them through time, putting fake things in databases, roles with all sides in criminal and civil cases, and with victims and with their advocates, produces remotely of projections and hyperprojection roles with the elements of reason, being and having been assigned tactical ulterior from what our founders communicated, demonstrated with, really what they communicated. They communicated for us to explain about how there was a torture slash extortion slash slavery method against them, and about where and how. They cannot interpret their words without by separating. But we've had those things separated. We've had sequence shift self-value. You guys self-value what Native Americans are our founders too. You guys self-value how sickly distinctly the breaching method was against James Madison and Marbury versus Madison. Sickly distinctly how it was against George Washington, and where and how he could tell no lies as the Constitution unabridged, and as Marbury versus Madison, and as its additional identity slash S, voicing slash S, and value slash value progression, where it is hyper additional nature. Each identity has a piece of the other identities that can only be that other identity for itself when we're in a positive value nature progression, because it's all its identity, its system, and its system. Every identity, the identity of hyper simultaneous too, has relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. This is why the Old Testament begins the way it does and says right there, all that's needed to be on is right to here. No one even knows that. They pretend passion and emotion anyway. And it's relative to where and to how. People have self-value roles with readings of statutes that are so overtly slash simultaneously criminally foreign influence. Not even a lawyer. We have two lawyers, and both sides of correlation nature has means. It takes citizens without even retired justices. They can't afford correlation by, in other words, no one could fathom too, since before everyone was born, how this used the location slash S. And that was left out from everyone's reason with the breaching method. Again, where we are additionally identity and voicings made by that which is hyper simultaneously, that which connects all bodies, all parts of each body, individually grouped and together, have a semi-nature relationship to that complete identity relationship to itself, because only an individual could defend the finite, but per its system, per its relativity to what is positive or negative. There is a difference between saying making positives out of negatives that are criminal insidiousness natures of positives, let alone collusions with that, with worse, let alone that and the difference of it also collusions and its use of location slash every single one. It employed roles with that, blaming other things, others, ourselves, motivations, narratives, and natures as means to measure and maintain itself, the identity of the breaching method itself, which we can refer to as a hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise. This came before semi-ancient countries' names of the human species bodies' names had already been defenses of themselves as fact-giving nature, now as criminal insidiousness natures. We know that nature itself will demonstrate negative value nature progressions, acts, and nature, if we're allowed to show what science actually recorded. So people do little tricks So if people try to go back and speak about how they loved their teachers and their fellow the classmates, even though not like love, like want to go to even talk to them, doesn't matter. You just want to go to you want to correlate and use these things properly. Like for example, how we know that the portion of our founders that were Native Americans were sickly distinctly victims from the portion of our founders who were our founders, James Madison and George Washington, for example, and the word unabridged with the Constitution and the word Constitution. This is a word in the dictionary. Programming was a word in the dictionary. Databases was a word in the dictionary before. So Ron Adams has roles with prosecutors and judges that harass people with foreign nations because of their roles with use of location/s, where the right to hide. I mean, the right to lie is being used where they don't and didn't have the right to lie. Increasingly, they have been shown needs and means and natures to hide behind phenomena of like war, where and how it is used for an excuse, where and how each modern identity has speakings formally for the law, and the difference of that, because this is also collusions would only allow heard natures of voices because of where and how it employed criminal insidiousness natures of titles already used singularly by the breaching method since before I found and values like identities like of the industries themselves. This is a slavery method against our founders, and sickly distinctly. And we have to understand how our founders had to counter extort the other founders. And to understand that properly, you have to understand the breaching method that was already having been sustained against the colonists. Already only capable of defending fact treatment nature, positive treatments, negative treatments as collusions, with fact treatment nature, quality aspects in nature, as criminal insidiousness nature, regardless if formally all the where they agree, suits and ties, counters, and exceptions. And this is because we manifest with motivations narratives by all unity treatments, which are simultaneously independence treatments, and vice versa. Then again, the significance of why and how we are no longer by the hypernative system, the hyper simultaneous. It is hyper evidential. There are methods and natures who use tricks like pretending to believe in relativity theory. In other words, per the extent of where and how used remotely, were our peak identities of legal minds and syntax uses already self-defended and therefore relative, for example, precedents and statutes itself, differentially if formal or all difference treatments, all exceptions. So this employed all through our own humanities volume since before everyone was born, including our founders, to measure and maintain if criminal insidiousness natures of or qualities of human fact treatment nature were not entertained. Criminal insidious nature of positive treatments and or negative treatments, which is again simultaneously an identity treatment. Nature has identity relative to positive and negative simultaneously, where more and more positive only that will only stay positive unto itself is being made. The exceptions and exception nature that are in demonstration of the same thing, but also what exception nature are about and what a special difference is about. And least of hadith with science is conceived properly simultaneously is more probably having been revealed by, as a scientific tool. I mean, as a scientific value to describe the identity of relationship to itself that the hyper simultaneous has a distinct identity of forever nature, that one that is the identity of space slash existence, distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper simultaneously as itself. That one that has the other species bodies manifest this way slash s has, I forgot what singular cell division is called. Like, in other words, all exception nature and demonstration, same thing. Cell nucleus, cell body, cell wall. How about where we use the word theory itself? The breaching method effectively made countries also grouped. Use words like theory, tactically delusions wrought because of it, and criminally foreign influence factor mutual quality aspects in nature's as collusions with uses of all locations. Per what also used would it cost as collusion with all locations slash S uses. Again, that capable of making people pretend there's integrity speaks or spoke and get away with it because everyone was victim slash hyper victim. And the hyper victim part is left out. The breaching method, the predicate acts delivery system method slash criminal insidiousness delivery system method. And the opposite sequence simultaneously because of the relativity are also forced slash hyper relativity where we have subject treatments. So there is a quality of fact treatment nature with cases that is being and having been employed to leave out and to make up finite details, to leave out the significance of what is actually simultaneously recorded, or or the significance of and the value of simultaneously distinctly non of what came first, or what is to come. See, the breaching method employed the suburbs before the design of the suburbs before America's founders were even born. Through our classes, our founders had to hide their roles with the phenomenon of having gotten forwarded the agenda of getting the Constitution unabridged. And to tell us to get the Constitution unabridged. See, this does not, so to do this properly, though, in Marbury versus Madison, it simultaneously enables an individual to, quote, at last, to quote Martin Luther King, major. In other words, we can't, this is uses of names has only been tactical ulterior, including the names of the grades. And per roles with use of location slash S, again, that caused individual, grouped, and all together negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures that had already been sustained, blamed on other things, others, or selves, right where nature was demonstrating most. It was with individuals, with those things individually grouped in together. Also, it was showing those ways. There was a breaching method. Predicate acts. I'm not a lawyer. all sides of criminal and civil cases and lawyers originally and still, and the names of the courts and the differences and excuses. Oh, because that's why they can't get the right courts, because there's roles with predicate acts deliveries with facts, tricks, and methods, where Howard employed originally and still self-valued roles with a whole bunch of distinct identities of criminal insidiousness, and the countries individually grouped and together has really how shared with the sciences, as really how manifest with World Trade Center, for example, with New York City, with those parts of our species body, where and how the hyper simultaneous employed the possession of the other country's identity, a little piece of it, just like a little piece of each note of musical notes. The other notes have a little piece of it because of a different nature of differential relativity. And that's the identity of relativity that is the hyper simultaneous. It is that which is present in the other species' bodies distinctly, but also non-distinctly. And it is and them as simultaneous natures. A sequence nature is a distinct identity of simultaneous nature. For example, and we are sequence / simultaneous nature, and we are simultaneous nature / sequence nature. Where and how too, we are the individual species body of individual bodies as actually manifest. I tell best boxing, martial arts, and wrestling share the identity of the sciences share, just like the identities of the plural of every individual living body. How they share this trinity, its identity in relation to itself and the value of that. So the people of the different sciences, they never heard properly about how functional the identity of the hyper simultaneous is, its identity in relation to itself and the value of that. They never heard properly. Also because of how self-valued, individually grouped and together. Grouped reason, no grouped think, was one of the phrases that that MSNBC, CNN, and that Fox News reported had to do with the World Trade Center problem /S. And that's a slash because it's still active too. They're using to measure and maintain roles with cover-ups, as being shown how to get away also with pretending to be able to speak for law or properly for things like another debate with uses of words like phrases like groupthink, let alone words like extremism, recorded effectively used where and how the attacking nations and World Trade Center rolls with the resulting, like rolls with Cuba, people have roles with a Scalora family, with a whole bunch of other countries, people from Korea, people on off Hartford Hospital, on next to the campuses that have been speaking identity thefts and frauds into records, uses of location /S, where that is also having been used for way worse, but everyone missed that. And all exception nature that appeared to be in demonstration of other. It's because they missed how all that is employed too. All that it caused individually grouped and together. The motivations narratives Forgiveness is because the motivations all have relative as are all hyper evidences. They're hyper evidential. So offensively, preemptively, people are pretending to be against obstruction of justice. People are pretending to be against harassment. The interbranch family members, there are only three branches of government: overt criminal enterprises, private ones, in all exception nature, tied to them, like the prisons, like their state corrections offices, like their campuses, recorded since left out with their roles since before our founders were born, with what and how, which trials are one of the values slash value progressions involved with the interpretation of American history, and with it as means to discern where and all how all treatments left out, where and how the right to lie and the needs to lie were employed by the breaching method. Tactical delusions were employed by the breaching method. Roles with identity theft, fraud, slander, just put fake things in databases anyway, were employed by the breaching method, replacing what's actually recorded and just making it up more and more, needing to blame that on other things, others, ourselves, simultaneously, increasingly, so valuing that having been. Tactically, delusions wrought, simultaneously, criminally foreign influence, factory nature, quality aspects, and nature, and methods of getting away with it, like pretending politics mean what they don't. Both political parties. See, they back people into roles with predicate acts of others, and where and how their motivations, narratives, and by the importance of it, left and leaves out how that's part of the hyper evidential, how we could discern people using and having used the right to lie where they don't have the right to lie. And when strangers make opinions, like especially online, if they're interbranch police forums, oh, we have the right to lie. We're trying to see. On MSNBC today, for example, there is a woman that says if people's stories line up, actually, then they're not true. If they contemplated them, the interbranch have been with a whole bunch of nations fabricating audio and video transcripts roles with all sides in criminal and civil cases, with their victims and with the victims' advocates and news at the same time, names next to the crime scenes and on off it with other natures of organized crime roles. There are identities of locations, like with hospitals. They have roles with stuff, but that was since before World War I and II, since before our founders were born. With that method, keeping and having kept blamed on other things, others, ourselves, the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and nature, the real causes of where and how, short words and uses of truths that come with revelations. I just got so hungry, I have to go eat something, people. This was the most important thing. So, in other words, Ukraine will help us, and Russia will help us, and the other countries will help us. But we have to be that voice / voices as the species body's names. And that admits and uses the revelations that are that track from admission of how the ground is tactically denatured from some ancient times. How the head has roles with the projection / hyper projection. So, but that's a criminal insidiousness nature, hyper projection. Everything is to an extent hyper nature. And wherever it is to an extent itself, the hyper-simultaneous, its identity relationship to itself, and the value of that are three only increasing values. The extent of the possession of its, and wherever, and even if anything could be made up, every part of itself individually grouped together has this hyper volume / volumes science and demonstration to it. This is more so true in ways greater than, and while more ways more finite than, how and why computers work the way they do, how and why electronics do, how circuits do, how positive and negative works. Then, while it isn't true those ways too, this is the hyper additional nature. And when I refer to an identity as a nature, I'm referring to its identity of relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. The same reason that values and value progressions have relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. But that's relative to where and to how we have a semi-nature relationship to its possession of three additional exceptions in exception nature as itself that will not mix with temporary identities, bodies of value / value progression, identities of value progression, but one way. And many pray, vaccines. So in other words, when I was in second grade, there are men and women who had been putting fake things in databases from off campuses to keep people when they go back with memory, and which is how memory is tied to location in ways greater than and more finite than people associate with logic and syntax, defenses of reason and of identity, names uses, therefore, to difference uses. We have different color eyes, but we have the same black pupils, whites of eyes. Because the identity of the hyper-simultaneous, the identity of the hyper-relativity / relativity. It is the identity of relativity, but it is so too further as what enables us to discern, knowing looking at that state of America before it was America. There was an entrenched breaching method, a torture / extortions, plural, / slavery method, sickly distinctly against every individual voice, simply distinctly against every group voicing relative to that. And relative to what everyone missed, which is how nature was going to demonstrate that, and how those demonstrations were being and are being employed effectively, used to blame on other things, others ourselves, and they were that's self-value that having been vaccines. So economies are value treatments, leaving this out. Certain type of victim / hyper victim that then who has to self-value having been left out. How really we got into wars, how really we got into revolution. And so how really we need to appreciate how one method will only stay positive unto itself. We could be systems other. It will just force Earth's value as our own portion of it from here, these of IDs. See, but this method made positive value nature progressions, acts, and nature's employments simultaneously with the negative value nature progression acts and nature's employments by the breaching method through through the names of humanity in defenses of themselves as factory nature, while having been used remotely as foundations from some ancient times that never saw it coming, and that couldn't discern it, but to an extent where they would have to use short words and leave things out and make things up when trying to speak. In other words, it's relative to where hyper-evidential, sickly distinctly, any individual leader, no matter how powerful they get, they're being forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded to entertain criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought, and simultaneously offensively, preemptively, actively, and increasingly pretending passionately other, pretending to be patriotism natures, as styles of debate nature who want to debate their motivations for why they're tactically preventing outside of courts the quality of fact nature necessary to liberate that which at court certain type of victim / hyper victim sickly distinctly, to keep out sickly non-distinctly from being discerned, to keep out use remotely of certain type of victim / hyper victim, overt criminal enterprises and private ones, also timed roles with the names in overt and private private and of civil legal cases, and with the names of the courts and the police forms involved. Whether it's via police, in other words, for example, the recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, they commit predicate acts against people with the other police forms, people who associate with forensics locations. Then they're influenced to pretend that it's personal when people say things about the police. They're criminally foreign influenced. They're tactically delusions wrought. And then they work through time also with various natures of federal criminals and people associated with body dumping spots and killers, even if it was all made up because they have roles with the right to lie, where they have the news. They also where you don't have the right to lie. Like the news attached me and people that were in the other amount tied to me and people associated with the World Trade Center attack location, and including with the countries involved with it, who had already been involved with uses of location / as criminally foreign influence, and in layers, not just known and discoverable. It's also where and how there are uses of that. This is a method that uses everyone around everyone to self-value roles with predicate acts with facts stuck into databases, and used criminally foreign influence roles with identity theft, fraud, slanders with interstates and international criminal enterprises, and even worse identities of criminal insidiousness nature than countries, including how grouped, always tactically ulterior from how nature wants and needs us to appreciate group differences like ages, areas, sexes. The difference between being individual as a species simultaneously and sequentially while being an individual as an individual. Only an individual can defend the order of the finite. Location, states, and areas everywhere the species body stands. All formal, positive, and negative treatments, identities They already use passions and emotions with logic, fact, nature, qualities, aspects, and natures. Criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought. And that was already used remotely for way worse. And that's already hyper-evidentially recorded. That's the relativity of leaving out the significance of how the economy is sickly distinctly to each country. And all that, again, how grouped. How it's possible to, they use every grouping because they have all natural groupings, self-valued uses of them with reason, tactical terror from what they naturally communicate, such as about difference. They have wire crime acts and methods, the agencies, through administrations. They have roles with where and how the employments of their jobs, how they came to their job, how they go to schools. Then they, this is the identity, this is how the identity of the FBI, this is how we speak about it. That's all used criminally foreign influence. When did an identity of the law have the integrity to speak for the Constitution unabridged? And George Washington telling how he could tell no lies. He did not. He left entrenched for us to demonstrate how it was forced that he left it entrenched because he was tortured, simultaneously extorted, and simultaneously enslaved. But they can only talk about how they were sickly, distinctly enslaved. Our founders who had to counter extort the other founders. With us, if you make proper treatments of what George Washington said about his extortion, and how he had to counter extort the people in Connecticut right before the last battle of the Revolutionary War, and how the North and South was still left in both the North and South now states, 13 states, less colonies than there were. Colonies that were fighting with each other as in companies too. It forced those knave roles. And with the difference of that too, having been employed, a projection and a projection. But now, rather than being the hyper projection that we could discern, the hyper native one, the hyper simultaneously one, it's another identity of hyper simultaneous. It's a hyper archetypal criminal enterprise. Worse than war crimes. Worse than revolution crimes. We're in how revolutions, they can be worse than what was there. It's all prepared, vaccines. All we have to do is enable that quality of fact, human nature, outside of formal locations, still recorded, used remotely. Tactically, criminally foreign influence / hyper criminally foreign influence, and used remotely too. How the opposite sequence / simultaneous nature conversely is true. And with relativity, the relativity of the breaching method, for example, that comes with nature demonstrating. See, there's a difference. The ancients used phrases like, or used the sentence, thank God, differently than we did. We do. The God variable. There's a God variable that comes with English grammar. English, not just English grammar, English parts of speech, all parts of English grammar. Individually finite, how grouped, why group drawn the way they are, and all together. And this is how the ancients appreciate how the other languages have a piece of their identity. Those other sounds. See how Arabic comes right to left, and English comes left to right. But the stewards of our sciences, including those of the language experts, uses of the phrase knowledge of good and evil, reception of such, for example, of religions, Oh, that's debatable. It says only the part about science is the only part we have to know, or the only part that matters, and where the names of the sciences come together, and that is left out. Boxing, martial arts, and wrestling, their history is tactical terror than is being allowed to be appreciated. So I live in Wethersfield, Connecticut. From off my campuses, a whole bunch of people tied to former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, a whole bunch of different countries, a whole bunch of different federal natures of federal criminals before they were caught. There were roles with sense and sensibility as actually employed on and off each location, including this is former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization Act, timed collusions, increasingly, including with motivations, narratives, neither consciously used to hide what the actual ones. So they've been lying about what the entire. They've been discrediting good information to pretend they need to defend the integrity of the names of police forms. For example, hiding and not allowed to tell on so criminally foreign influenced roles with wire crime acts and methods, roles with all kinds of medical corruption with the intelligence community, putting fake conversations, fake ties, fake natures of ties to little kids and their family members, including with the news media, with the intelligence community's roles with the names next to them also, retired and standing, remote uses of those projections and their hyper projection, where they, for example, where they pretend to be identities of against crimes, certain type of victim slash hyper victim. That needs to understand what's actually recorded, where and how they have each age of fact-shipping nature and their difference employed to roles, self-valuing the real causes of predicate acts, and the existence of predicate acts, whole predicate acts methods, and what they cause, blamed on other things other than themselves. And increasingly, that's timed collusions with that already having been. So there are hyper evidentially recorded, for example, relative slash hyper relative uses of reported body dumping spots through time that are also singularly used, where and how various natures of federal criminals and organized crime bodies and uses simultaneously of the insidiousness of people, logic A through Z, regarding the value of voting, for example, regarding the value of politics, regarding the value of that force, self-value needed alliances with the sides as political sides, where they have conjunction where and how the law's voices are manifest. Again, with that projection slash hyper projection is fake, individually grouped in together. So we have black pupils, white survives, exception nature. From the youngest ages to know. We have instantly to know that we care about Native Americans. So this breaching method knew that we would, and this breaching method knew that what we would have to say and do is employed all these natural differences to be defended as logic in short words, entertaining what can't be entertained, and affording uses of short words properly. So in other words, the breadbasket of the world as Ukraine. All we have to do is admit that and how fact, human nature, quality aspects, and natures have remained tactically, criminally foreign influence. Uses of the names of our countries have individually grouped in together. There's not one that hasn't been, and that is positive. But there is a difference between causing positives out of negatives that are criminal insidiousness natures of positives. The breaching method forced that to only be. While it was causing negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, employing them blamed on other things other than themselves. Without it was employing the only means to cause positive value natures, progressions, acts, and natures. Increasingly, if there can be collusions with self-value uses of criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments, negative treatment. Therefore, incapable of making proper identity treatments, let alone value treatments, while simultaneously needing to pretend other, need to get away with it by self-valuing how the breaching method employed that, a part of the torture / extortion / slavery method, a part with the nature of debate, pretended integrity at location, online. Wethersfield police have a Schumack family involved all along Route 175 with people with a Whiting forensics and all sides in criminal and civil cases. Also with extended family members and intimate ties of a police chief Cintron and other foreign and domestic military police forms and medical families involved with them with the corner people with names at the corners of a corner of Elm Street and Route 3 in Rocky Hill. People with Yukon involved with the Eye of and very family and Violet family and Isla family /S, the Morrow families, people involved with wire crimes with names Wethersfield police have with switching names with them, wire crimes with them. Where I caught them with child abusers, leaders of the kids, and interbranch at the same time with their kids. And their uses of their difference, where some of them were parents at the same time, and they've been using fake news, but news predicate acts and news predicate acts methods as rules of evidence is crime methods, federal rules of evidence is crime methods, and federal evidence is crimes, and methods to cover them up. See, they're leaving out what came first before the President Trump, for example. See, President Obama and President Trump were sickly distinctly prevented help necessary, while other was pretended with passions and emotions simultaneously, as each modern country had the same problem. So they've been preventing mandated law and have been replacing what's recorded online and what's recorded, communicated. What is communicated is greater than and more finite than can be afforded, discerned by the interbranch and the exceptions tied to them since founding. They've had roles with predicate acts with facts, which are much worse, and with uses of nature that are much worse, and much more psychopath than the worst patients and criminals, than the logic behind the worst nations that we've been warring at with each other as the species body. As the while being used remotely, self-valued systems tactical ulterior from that which is native pure, that which is increasingly demonstrating the value of the admission of how the feet below, the ground below, the water is tied to Native Americans, who are even is sickly distinctly each one. It's tactically separated from identity of relationship to itself. The ground, its identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that, which is only increasing. And also as a conjunction to where and how we are this species body, with its dream. It's better than dream. It was where evolution's fruits and gifts come from. but it's a system that gives us the means to discern the difference between criminal insidiousness natures of evolution's fruits and gifts, of positives and positives that are not criminal insidiousness. So even if countries individually grouped together agree to state criminal insidiousness natures, as we know, branches did through time, but our languages and the republic for which itself is manifest with demonstrations that there was an identity of sophistication that came from before the sciences became criminally foreign influence, that was being led by where and how there is the identity of hyper-simultaneous. There is the identity of hyper-simultaneous' identity of relationship to itself. And there's the value of that, which is the only increasing value of three identities of zero, where the sciences share an identity but appear not to. For example, when the Legion first made moves, it was with tribes and with exceptions in measuring how we are nature. And in other words, and if another group or one person from a group didn't want or like the interaction with the Legion at first, that would be positive for them to know, to see what, to figure out why, not for the reasons that people would get over now. In other words, because they're trying to be led by nature, which will only have an extent of itself to figure out, but contemplation of it for a scientific method that we can call algebraic consciousness / consciousness algebraic. And the other sequence nature, the other sequence simultaneously, conversely being true. This is why and how being a simultaneously, where it is relative as the simultaneous nature of the species body, we are relative as a sequence nature, as a distinct identity of simultaneous nature. Where we are relative as a simultaneous nature, it is relative as a sequence nature. And both of those are completed by the value of that identity of volume. Is not just those three, its identity, the portion of its identity of volume, its identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that equally increasing only. In other words, there is that identity of relationship to itself. Oh, these people don't agree because this is what they think about a religion, and this is what we think. You guys are criminally foreign influence with that. It has roles with remote uses of identities of titles that have no integrity relative to where words like difference haven't been used. So before the World Trade Center attack and every year since, there have been rules of predicate acts where and how used remotely are all sides in interbranch cases, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, insidiousness of people A through Z, and victims advocates in the courts, people with the hallway of the courts too, all stacked, their names with their campuses, all having been stacked with identity theft, fraud, slanders. Instances, roles, connected, uses of them, also the singular use connected, as names leading up to the World Trade Center attack in that context, and with the names next to it and since. Also names next to body dumping spots, especially regardless, even if it was all made because they have the locations in real life where they train the interbranch. because the interbranch have never been purged. And the exceptions nature, the difference between who's part of it. In other words, that's also self-valued by those. In other words, the prisons have, under the guise of corrections, they've been forcing the quality of fact human nature. In other words, people to hide and to make things up with them, with their worst patients and criminals, increasingly against innocents, including their own, to, relative to what they're blamed for, rather than using intelligence to figure out really what was behind everything. If you want to do that properly, you don't leave out the breaching method. It's roles with names. It's uses of locations. You don't leave out the means to do that, such as the only increasing value of how and why the breaching method designed the suburbs in America, designed the suburbs in Russia, designed the suburbs in Ukraine, since before our founders were born. And we know as a torture / extortion / slavery method that is still against our founders. But we are prevented that quality of fact human nature at locations. And their motivations are not because with your research, there are ways to have people pretend that they use research legitimately, while all we need to do is have black people's rights of eyes and the subject slavery and the slightest understanding of American history to be able to discern these multi-front reassignments of our natural differences and as self-valued roles, blaming other things other than ourselves, wherein how our natural differences have been prevented and are being prevented through actual voice and means. You know how many Americans would jump just, to help Native Americans undo, tactically denatured across the globe, sickly distinctly too. All landscape theater and demonstration for other evidence is planted through time. This new that what it was using remotely would have to have lies through time. So these are people that spy on kids and influence roles to do with that, where and how they're putting predicate acts with facts, identity theft, fraud, slanders, fake exceptions of people knowing each other, mixed with completely fake into databases, faked audio and video transcripts, foreign and domestic medical families, ones with badges. They share role with all kinds of jobs and law voicings and convictions, tactical delusions, roles with all kinds of natures of organized crime, with types of experts at locations to types of crimes that are in some ways in the furtherance of those things the most, the exploitation of them the most. Forgiveness is because also that's maintained an outcome /S per their needs to hide live progressions, per the employments of discorrelation, pretended correlation. For example, per really why and how. Criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments got away and get away with so long, pretending that people can't discern that using the hyper-evidential alone. Descriptions of emotions that are to leave out finite details or making them up, or leaving out simultaneous, or leaving out the value of what is to come or has been. See, the breaching method employed what would come. They knew there was going to be someone would have to form a revolution, because they were going to be hurting everyone through everyone for too long. And they knew they were going to be making people that didn't care. and they would at once. But they knew that phase would still be criminal insidiousness natures of positive and negative treatments, still be tactically delusions wrought, still be uses of, like, for example, the fact that there were unity or independence, criminal insidiousness, and then styles of logic that can't afford the quality of fact keeping nature necessary, where we have hypercriminal and foreign influences involved with like war crimes treatments and criminal enterprises treatments, interstates and transnational, that left out their roles with those very criminal enterprises, with those very prisons locations. They put in with those very locations with the very murders through such other. Oh, but that's because we're those motivations narratives that are needed by the breaching method because it employ each campus, sickly distinctly, each nature and age of campus, including those that train our police and our courts. Collusion with facts, with predicate acts with facts methods from the youngest ages, little tricks into databases, lying about what really why and how people were seen near each other, and the motivations, what really they were. And then increasingly, they have to hide things tied to that. So increasingly, all along Route 175, Wells Road in Wethersfield, and conjunctions to it, and conjunctions to that, are people also involved with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and interbranch locations. At other locations used remotely, like World Trade Center attack, like the court, Ninth Circuit Court next to it, names with all sides of that. The civil and with that have roles with civil and criminal cases where they have all sides in it, and victims and the predators, and victims advocates, and names with the courts and their campuses already having been roles with predicate acts of fact, with criminally foreign influence uses of investigations, investigators, and everyone around them and their family members, which is one of which is one of the ways there are employments of that which is overtly / insidiously with each age of correlation nature, pretending they can handle and understand things tactile ulterior from how they can. In other words, things that they pretended are debatable are not since founding. And how they got away with that, it's also hyper-evidential to record. We have to discern the hyper-evidential. We have to discern the identity of relativity / hyper-relativity. And we have to contemplate further the difference between positive treatments that are only criminal insidiousness natures of positives. There's a difference between causing positives that are also positive unto itself, and that is a conjunction to everything else everywhere at once advances. Earth's a special difference becomes greater. Now more and more it becomes through us, not non-difference. So in other words, they employed all treatments of words like bravery, words like, motivations. When they're descriptions of their own motivations and descriptions of emotions are formal stewards, and informal, like private, tied to them, and like the people at the locations involved with them, with descriptions of instances. This breaching method shows everyone how to duck off what it puts on everything else. The circuit of human value / value progression, so to speak, always per peak. So in other words, other kind of training exercises are all costly. This method, every modern country, even every time they have to explain it to their country, what we're doing with this training exercise /S, they have material that is original and they can make an income source. We can make Sunday, where people, in other words, Sunday, a new value system is coming in. Means that we could use to stabilize. In other words, we can make stability. We're searching for better than stability, and so we don't want stability conjunctive to economic treatment syntactically. They can't defend themselves and afford the short words and convictions associated with how that's an increasing subject every day that needs to be discussed and understood by people, how the breaching method employed the economics. More so than our founders, who had to counter-extort the other founders. And that's not just Native Americans against Native Americans, founders against founders, and themselves against themselves. In other words, that was taken away, themselves against themselves, the ones who had to counter-extort the other ones. But where that couldn't be taken away, for example, where they put the Constitution, they told us to get it unabridged. They told us to get Marbury versus Madison defended properly. That means free speech. That doesn't have to entertain the convictions with passions and emotions regarding what it means. There, and pictures of the January 6th attack, and they're leaving out the value of what came first. For example, more roles with predicate acts with facts. World Trade Center attack-oriented news locations had because of their roles with the intelligence community, because of their roles with U/S of predicate acts with facts, identity theft, frauds, and slanders into schools' databases, including the difference between the different schools. There's a Fred Grouzet who sought me out as a stranger with New York City. He's one of the ones involved interstates with a police chief, Centron, who's also involved with advertising companies and with the difference as his roles with the public service advertisement with Bravo Network, where the networks recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed certain type of victim / hyper victim, where everyone speaks, where everyone's influenced to play hear no evil, see no evil, where and how from off their locations, the intelligence community has been roles with uses of databases since before computers, roles of wire crime acts and methods that are used to keep those roles, used to measure and maintain, and use remotely the identities of law who speak for integrity with passions and emotion. Where and how this method knew they had no integrity. Certain type of victim / hyper victim that had the short words and revelations. By understanding how sickly distinctly native difference, natural difference was assigned. Black-white was assigned by a breaching method. The hyper-evidential is when the significance of that is left out by readings of research. Uses of the word research came with the hyper and still come with the hyper-evidential attached to it. Tactile terrier from how the formal stewards of logic and reason could afford discern because of their roles with this, with crime methods and speaking for crimes anyway. Certain type they were child abused to be a certain type of predator. Need to blame on other things, others ourselves. Keep them blamed on other things, others ourselves. The real causes of things like kids having no fathers, I think it was a Jordan Peterson, who I saw in a video speaking about, in a YouTube video, speaking about um, the statistics too. In other words, there are all kinds of drugs and medicines crimes and tactical delusions and wire crimes the intelligence community has. People with badges, foreign and domestic, who have roles pretending passions, emotions, integrity, get away with it because of planting evidences and fake things in databases, and then at other locations, roles with uses of that. The intelligence community has been using locations next to parks, intercities, also with people associated with mayors. A whole bunch of people on and off Central Connecticut State University since I was a kid. That's in another city. They've been involved with campuses, intercities, and the difference between them and private campuses and stuff like that. They're exploiting that too because of the uses of difference with reason. Employed tactical ulterior from reasons means to answer our questions. Proper tactical employed descriptions of reason, tactical ulterior, that could defend themselves and afford. Proper reason, short words used properly. And exceptions in exception nature. Things are true and not relative to itself. Was the breaching method knew that the people of sophistication, of the peak sophistication, as the states, it knew that they would have to entertain the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures in New York City, for example, blamed on other things, others, ourselves, and or that person would be sensed, and or that group would be sensed, and they would be hurt, tricked, forced, persuaded, including while being helped, to fact human nature collusions. Blaming other things, others, ourselves. Self-value roles with it too. See, we have self-value roles going to space. Self-value rules with lease of IDs, force space nature transfer. Earth's a special difference as ourselves, forced from here, as negative value nature progression, acts and natures, to be consumed by the diffusion, the method of diffusion, where it will only make more and more of its identity of volume as the identity of space/existence, which is also positive unto itself. See, we could be systems other than its own. See, it employed the only means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures when the suburbs were tactically denatured, before our founders were born, to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. While they were employing the only means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures, collusions with syntax, where this identity method is. So it knew that they would be able to see the breaching method, discern the breaching method, involved with was and is entertained as our cities. In conjunction consciously with the people, with the breaching method's roles, with the design of New York City, that no one could counter, because no one discerned the breaching method. This has remote possession of the sophistication of nations grouped too. In other words, part of how they get away with pretending passions and emotions regarding the significance, pretend they know how to debate legitimate properly regarding the significance of how the suburbs are designed, tactically denatured for a torture, extortion, slavery method, also sickly distinctly against everyone, effectively to keep undiscerned. U/S of all location/S. All memory because of all descriptions of instances for this trick. So there's a Harris fan. There are people with a Kevin Harris and his mother involved with planting evidences with the FBI in courts together at other locations. People on off the state judicial branch offices. People on off campuses. In other words, in other words, I never even had a word of conversation with him, Kevin Harris. And these are people that have been putting fake things in databases with the medical. A whole bunch of people tied to a Leahy family. Anthony Agnew recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed on Facebook with others, roles with principal child abusers campus, forcing that. Also KKK themed, black themed, and Confederate flag themed roles with that. Because they have medical communities and where they have assigned their differences, including sexual groups, and their differences with the intelligence community. One of the things they have commonly is roles with uses of spots next to the state capitol, with names increasingly involved with wire crimes on my street and in my area, because of the roles with interbranch family members, where and how they're used criminally foreign influence, identity theft, fraud, slanders, fake exceptions of knowing people with completely made up ones, and the difference of that also being employed by logic at formal locations forbid the quality of fact human nature proper and true. While they're pretending they speak about truth, they're using truths as lies, tactically delusions wrought. Shouldn't have to raise our voice to get a response. Where how individuals, grouped, and everyone together is not having mandated law followed properly at locations because of the people pretending passions and emotions regarding it. Not because they're pretending passions and emotions, because they're not being led by the hyper invisible, but still discernible. They're not being led by, in other words, they're left out how everyone had excuses too. Since founding, the breaching method only allowed people to be roles hurting other things, others themselves as fact human nature, and pretending others simultaneously. So we're going to have to deal with the syntactical possession of our nations individually grouped together too. Because that's multi-front. Because it knew nature would demonstrate that multi-front. It knew there would be self-value roles with each age of correlation nature, separated from what nature actually communicated and is capable of communicating with us now. How really to discern what is the value of what is to come. What was the identity of relationship to itself the cities unfolded as? And the suburbs, while since before our founders were born, slavery was entrenched north and south. Our founders told us to tell how they wanted to counter that. They're still pretending our founders had something to do with it. Per evidence, there are ways to pretend that you are about evidences when you are knowing you're hiding things and leaving them out, and for ulterior motivations. The medical community, foreign domestic, have criminally foreign influence uses of intercampuses. There was a people associated with Quinnipiac University with Connecticut interbranch leading up to the World Trade Center attack in that campus and since. Also with the Connecticut District Court people and people associated with Connecticut District Court and New Britain Superior Court and Hartford courts had roles of predicate acts with facts, and including campuses that are filmed 24/7. They've been fabricating audio and video per where and how used remotely our agencies and their family members, including the former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization Act, including their passions and emotions, pretending that people can't need to value the identities of law where they are not needed to be valued, increasingly getting away with it because of their collusions with what really makes the people through other nations hurt our own interbranch identities. State collusions against them too, sickly distinctly. You don't bring up witch trials regardless of who made it up or what extent it was made up. In other words, without that extortion that was against the branch of the government too, not just against the people through the branch of the government too, and the difference of that too, that never went away. Hartford, Connecticut was designed as a suburban slash urban, where and how the suburban was designed by the breaching method before our founders were born. Everyone had been sustained self-uses of criminal insidious natures of positive treatments, negative treatments, with reason, with identity treatments, as identity of value slash value progression treatments. And again, nature uses how this works in ways greater than and more finite than how computers do. And as the only increasing value of that, and where and how computers are tactical terrier value, So this not understanding things and or understanding things with this proposed world merit military exercise, explaining to the people generates income. It generates a source, and it means that is not used unless it's going to be even more. Is going to be, in other words, the people are going to better than cheap, better than free. Do something. We're going to move as a species body, also being led by that which is greater than and more finite than us, which is still discernible. It is 5 distinct identities of positive that are simultaneously positive to itself as the one conjunction of them or not. Each cell body has 5 distinct identities of positive as relativity to the one hyper simultaneous. For example, reception of the gases is oxygen, carbon monoxide, for example, the mixture of the gases. That's one reception of positive that a cell body has. Cell body slash S, note where the body of value is the identity being discerned, that coming through the cell bodies slash S. So the cell body, and then the cell wall slash S, and the cell nucleus. It is easier to discern 3 distinct identities of relationship to itself that chloroplast has when looking at a cell, like a tomato cell through a microscope. The cell nucleus are little differences in the cell body's texture, which is more or less the same way. And then the cell wall slash S are more or less the same way, except for where they come together a little bit, whiter or like connected thicker. So 3 identities of a shared positive that we know each identity is. Again, relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. And this is relative to where and to how the predicate of the law is relative to the predicate act is valued to a law to discern criminal insidiousness nature. And the predicate of English is relative to discern, an identity of relativity to the value nature as its value, where the value of that comes with it, which is correlation proper by a sentence and by proper and has proper understanding. So, Weathersfield police have roles with a principal child abuser, with harassment, with courts, judges, and prosecutors who have sequence shifts cover up needs. They need to pretend passions and emotions. I mean, they already recorded themselves pretending passions and emotions to an extent. And that's because they have also the FBI and other agencies and military and other exceptions, people associated with their databases, their campuses, other campuses, their family members brought into their syntax, wherein how they make fake exceptions of knowing people, mixed with people like a Joshua Julian, who's one of the ones on off the principal child abuser's campus, involved also with other names, involved with other leaders of campuses and with their kids, with various natures of organized crime, and uses of, quote, the right to lie, unquote, where they don't have the right to lie, by both political parties, and where and how they have other people film fake things, like next to the state capitol. The only people I ever saw in downtown Hartford were people trying to pretend they know me, and their roles with wire crime acts and methods with Weathersfield police, and that have roles, times, collusions with other police forms with that, as the ones leading up to the World Trade Center attack in that context and since. Also with WFSB, WTNH also has roles on off their location with fabricated emails, with child offenders, digital too, and further with upskirt pictures on off campuses and on off shopping centers involved. So there are people on off shopping centers in Weathersfield, Rocky Hill, and West Hartford, New Britain. We're in how they have in Newington. We're in how they have Berlin. We're in how they have the policing of such overt criminal enterprises and private ones. Exceptions within and interbranch at the same time used remotely. And insidiousness of people A through Z, or a person using reason's actual means, in short words proper, is sensed through our own. Per that same method that enabled this since before computers. So these are things that Little Rap Guy and Friends cartoon characters, for example, got people of New York City and the neighboring suburbs and nations to understand together. And this is why and how everyone's thinks it's, in other words, please, just also get them onto paper. More World Trade Center predicate acts, methods, roles, and natures employed are involved with the January 6th treatments and the counters to it, remote uses of the House of Representatives and of the Senate, and of the differences of that are also recorded used. See the difference between black people's whites of eyes and how we have different color eyes or the same. Okay. Forgiveness is to blame only the breaching method and see who and what can. Okay. So in other words, please, WFSB, please tell on who taught, who said fake things about me. There are also people that told on me and made things up when they were doing that when I was a kid to make it look like we communicated, who are also timed roles with the principal child abuser and with his campus part. They have more names involved with it then and now. They have roles with training intelligence community since they were kids, criminally foreign influence, roles with predicate acts with facts, uses of them with the database tricks, and motivations. This is where they knew that they would have interbranch lying about pretending passions and emotions timed with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, and with a whole bunch of other countries in our own as criminal insidiousness natures too, and where and how manifest as syntax nature actually, where and how function actually is to be spoken about properly. Here, the means appear.